Hello and welcome to Dance 4's A Conversation Place number 7, and we've got Matt and Victor here, and they're going to be talking about all things about creativity and young people and some exciting things that they've got in their own practice, own lives, things like that. So I'm going to hand you over to Victor, and he's going to talk to you about where he's at.
Hello. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Victor.
How are you?
I'm good, really good. Yeah, good to see you.
Where are you calling from?
From my kitchen in Manchester.
Your kitchen in Manchester.
Just about a mile down the road from Contact, where I work.
All right. I'm calling from Middlesex University, where I'm working at the moment. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Lovely to meet you.
Victor, will you tell me a bit about your practice then and what you're engaged in at the moment?
So I'm involved in dance. I usually label myself as a dance artist, but then I go on to explain to other people that I think my practice has quite a lot of different facets. In that I'm a choreographer, I'm a performer, I'm a dance teacher, and I'm a researcher as well. And I regard all these different aspects as part of my artistic practice. So I'm quite interested in how all these elements fit together as a whole, rather than segregated entities. So at the moment, I'm doing a PhD research that's co-funded between Middlesex University and Dance 4, looking at the development of young talents in dance. And focusing especially on creativity, the notion of creativity, and how creativity manifests itself in dance, but also in general, how a dance organization work with young talents to develop their own sense of identity within the dance field, and help them pursue a career in dance. So I'm working mainly with the Center for Advanced Training Program at Dance 4 at the moment.
Okay, great. So I'm not from the world of dance. I'm not a dance practitioner. I'm more a dance lover, really, as an audience member. And for me, it's interesting for me that I'd probably fallen out of love with theatre in my early 20s. And then dance and live art particularly were what re-engaged me as an audience member and brought me back to refined performance and refined the kind of theatre that I now kind of make and love. So I've always been someone that's very connected to the dance world, and yeah, it has many resonances for me as well. What you're saying about this idea of unlocking young people's creativity through dance practice, and that connects very strongly to my current job at Contact Theatre, where I'm artistic director. Contact is somewhere that's founded on this principle that young people and their creativity have something very valuable to offer, both the arts but also the broader community and the world, really. Contact's a fascinating experiment, I think, in what happens when a leap of faith is made around young people's creativity, and sort of all kinds of brilliant things come out of that you could never predict. Contact's a wonderful experiment around that.
Yeah. So what kind of age group are you working with for your organization?
We work primarily with young people from 13 to their mid-20s. So right from very young people that are really not thinking about the arts as a profession for them at all. It's just a way of expressing themselves, and for many of them they're not really thinking about the work as art either. They might be young musicians or MCs or spoken word artists, or they're interested in dance, movement, street art, or performance. and we run a kind of weekly series of free drop-in sessions that really are just an invitation for young people to come, hang out, and start to develop some skills in the areas that they're interested in. But as that progresses through the organisation, there are some strands that are very developmental and focused on training, whether that's into our young company, a Level Up, which is a young media production and music group, Young Identity, which is young poetry, young poets kind of group. But also there are spaces which are really focused around young people's agency and young people's decision making and young people's leadership. And they're the projects that I think are really most fascinating at the moment.
Yeah. So do the young people feel comfortable with initiating projects themselves?
We run a project.
Newcomers, the ones that are not so used to that environment.
No, I think the newcomers, what's interesting is that they're seeing young people from backgrounds similar to their own, so not necessarily having trained in the arts, not necessarily at college or university, but seeing people from communities where they're based doing something amazing and creative, and begin to understand how that might be possible for them. Contact is very distinctive, I think, in this kind of the diversity and the social reach of our programs, and many of those projects are recruited actually in communities through community outreach activity that then draws young people back into the organisation, and specifically young people who are not already thinking of themselves as someone that might go to dance class or might join a youth theatre.
Yeah.
So we're very interested in young people who have amazing creativity to unlock, but are not yet already thinking of themselves as prototype artists.
Yeah.
So I'm interested if you tell me a bit more about the specific focus of your research, Victor, and how this might connect to this idea of unlocking creativity.
Yeah. So I guess there's two main aspects of my research. One is about observing other dance artists and dance teachers working with the students and their individual practices. And then on the other hand, I'm also teaching the students as well. So I'm observing my pedagogical practice. Yeah, so these are the two main things I've been doing at Dance 4. But recently I've also done some interviews to get some in-depth kind of behind-the-scenes perception that can support some of the observation I've seen. And one thing that I found really interesting recently, listening back to the interviews I've conducted with the students, is that the sense of community as well. The fresh ones that comes into the program for the first year, they're trying to navigate themselves within that community, and of course having the support of other students that might have been in the program for a longer period of time. They look up to them. They kind of model after their not just dance-wise, not just dance technique-wise, modeling after them, but the kind of openness to embrace dance as a movement form that can be really, really fluid between the practice of different artists. And what I heard also from the more experienced dancers in the group is that there's a very, very strong urge to initiate something within the program as well. In terms of initiating the projects, sometimes a choreographic piece, or even one of them was saying that it would be really nice if they're involved in the conversation of choosing the different artists that they would be working with.
Yeah.
And that's something that you don't really see in the classroom, because in the classroom they're really involved in the activities that are suggested to them. But when you actually spend time to speak to them, you understand that they also have the urge to really make certain choices and be part of that responsible group to make that choice as well.
Yeah.
So I was really when I was looking through your website, I was really interested in how you implement that within your organization. How practically, on a practical level,
Yeah.
how do you bring in the voices of these young artists in decision making?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Contact is really interested in this question of who is in the room when decisions are made. And as a public theatre, that's fascinating. Who decides the programme, and therefore what the audience that comes to engage with that programme might look like. And I genuinely think Contact is working in the opposite direction to most arts organisations, because we don't think so much about the audience that we want to attract, and therefore the programme that might attract them, and seek to develop new audiences over time in that way. Contact focuses entirely on who is making the decisions at the core. So we put a young panel together whenever we make a staff appointment. So all of the staff at Contact have been appointed both by a staff panel and a young panel, and they have 50-50 kind of decision making in that process. We have two young people, Reese and Afrina, who have come up through our young people's projects, who sit on our board as full board members. Whenever we make key decisions as an organisation, we pull together a panel from our various participation programmes. So, for example, we're about to embark on a capital refurbishment, and we put together a young panel to appoint the architects that are going to see through that capital project. So whenever there's a decision to be made, young people are engaged in that decision, and the same pertains to programming. So every year we recruit 4 young people to join our 4 staff that work directly on the programme. They go to the Edinburgh Festival as their first sort of team building experience and see a load of work together with the staff team. And then they come to all our programming meetings and also our artistic evaluation meetings. So they just join the conversation that becomes the programme. And some of them program work directly in, so they go and see work on our behalf. They join the conversation about what work we might commission, and they also help us evaluate what was successful and what we might learn from previous programs. And that means that we don't need to worry about whether our program is right for young people. It's really interesting to me that we don't think, oh, will this get a young audience? Will this piece speak to young people? We don't have to worry about that. The process means that we have an audience that is 70% under 35, which, our theatre program is essentially an adult theatre program, but it is palpable that the audience for that program is very young. And similarly, around diversity, I think it's a really interesting question for the sector that is still a theatre sector that is still failing to truly reflect the diversity of our communities. And again, rather than trying to attract or cater for those communities, we ensure that the decision makers are collectively diverse, and that produces a program that speaks to many different people and has many different voices reflected in the program that then attracts a diverse audience, rather than trying to approach that program, that issue in the other direction. And I think the sector has really failed to diversify, because I think we've been looking at the problem from the wrong, down the wrong end of the telescope.
Yeah. I mean, this notion of looking at the whole structure from the ground up, I think it's very interesting. I think most of the models that's working within the UK and also actually around the world as well, there's kind of this top-up structure that makes all the decision, that kind of the intention and the decision that are made top-up sometimes manifests itself very, very differently at the bottom, and that's where the problems usually come in, the clashes, and also misunderstanding. But if we work from the ground up, sometimes you don't even have those problems anymore. You don't.
That's right. That's it. I think that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. That those issues then don't they stop being problems.
Yeah. It works itself out, kind of, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I do see close resonances between what we're doing organisationally and how we see rehearsal rooms being increasingly just co-devised collaborative processes, and that the role of leadership, whether that's choreographic leadership or organisational, has become facilitative, and it's the facilitation of a conversation that becomes the piece, or that becomes the programme. And I see a lot of crossover between those kind of much more facilitative, flat structures.
Absolutely. I've been experimenting with that in my classes and also choreographic processes in working with the young dancers at Dance 4 as well. And it seems like such a straightforward solution that I'm surprised that not many people are willing to engage in it, and that's really kind of letting go a little bit as a teacher and as a artist going in to work with them, and really listen to what they're saying, and therefore allow them to really be co-participants in the creative process. So I'm there. I feel like my role has become increasingly more of a facilitator to allow things to happen, to really allow the voices of even the quieter ones to become more apparent in that situation.
And what do you hope will be the kind of the outcomes from your research? How will that learning be spread? You know, do you have a sense yet of where that research is heading?
Well, at the moment, I feel like I'm looking at quite a lot of different notions of creativity, because there are discussions around, let's say, little c and big C creativity, meaning creativity manifestation in everyday life, and then at the other end, you've got the creative geniuses that changes the field and domain in which they operate in. And I think my personal view on this is that, so yes, although there's, we would like them to be very successful in the field, but I tend to like to work on the lower end of the spectrum first, to get them have that sense of empowerment and sense of agency, so that they can progress on as they gain more experience within whichever field or domain that they're interested in working in. Because some people believe that you have to have an expert knowledge in something before you start being creative. And my view on that is that as you're learning the craft of that domain, you can already have that sense of creativity embedded within that process. You don't have to wait until you become an expert in that field. So yeah, I think it's.
I find that massively exciting, actually, and I agree with you. And that word agency is very powerful at Contact, because we're running a big project with Battersea Arts Centre in London and Contact in Manchester called The Agency. And it comes from a model in Rio. An artist, Marcus Faustini, developed this project, Agencia, The Agency, in this British context, which really takes a devised sharing process to produce small startup businesses in areas of low economic kind of opportunity for young people. We're working in two parts of North Manchester, Moston, Harper Hay. We recruit through a market stall, through barbers' shops, at McDonald's, really street-based recruitment, looking for young people that have got an idea for a project, but not the sense of the connections or the opportunities or experience for how to make that idea possible. And those ideas have been things like a board game and a baking project for families who access food banks, and a cosmetics line and a fashion label, a whole range of different outcomes. But the project uses a devised, sharing, collaborative making process to develop those ideas, share them, build them, change them. And then we select 3 of those projects each year to actually invest in. it's funded by the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, but I think it's an amazing, very exciting example of how creativity can produce these incredible outcomes that you can't quite predict. And these are young people who have not engaged as kind of young artists at all. You know, we're really just using this devised rehearsal process to unlock creativity that shoots off in all kinds of directions. And we could never come up with those projects. They're not ideas that the staff at Contact would ever come up with.
Absolutely.
But they remain massively exciting to us.
Yeah.
And only a few of them
the domain and the field as well, right? Don't they?
Say again, Victor.
They start shifting the domain and the field as well.
Completely.
Let that happen.
Exactly. Yeah, and it opens out into into all kinds of spheres that we normally don't touch through our practice in the building, which is hugely exciting. But is also a challenge to communicate to funders who are, for the most part, still very interested in the outputs that you've already agreed as part of a funding agreement, that you'll produce this many shows and this many people will buy tickets to it. And when the outputs start to become projects around community engagement, health, sport, a board game, a fashion label, a baking project, suddenly it becomes hard to talk about those outcomes in ways that maybe the arts funders really understand, even though it demonstrates how creativity has this massive potential and value well beyond and outside the arts. So I think, you know, that's the conversation now that I feel Battersea and ourselves and others engaged in this kind of work are now starting to really engage in.
Yeah.
So I'm interested then in you as a practitioner as well, and as an artist, and how your research, you think, is going to change the kind of work you might make, or where you might make that work, or who you might make it with. Is that a journey that you're also on?
I think it's already changing the way I work dramatically at the moment. But the way I facilitate a rehearsal, it's almost completely different than how I worked before. I think through working with young people, I've become far more of a listener, and by that I mean really kind of taking a step back a little bit as a dance artist, and try to be less controlling a lot of times, which is in itself a learning curve. But I think right now in a rehearsal room, what I enjoy the most is the collaborative conversations that comes out of it. That, you know, a lot of times when you have a certain preconception, you are actually blocking the possibilities that can come out of it. So a lot of times now I work with seeds, the idea of just planting a seed and kind of let it grow within the process. So before I go into the studio, I would prepare certain seeds that I would like to help grow in the process, and just allow it to flow within that.
This feels like a really poignant message to conclude this conversation on, Victor. It feels like it's been a really wonderfully vast and far-reaching chat. I'm sure there's lots more to uncover, maybe in another conversation. But for now, I just want to thank you both for taking part, and hopefully we'll talk again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to meet you, Victor.
Thanks. Great to meet you, Matt. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.